Over to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome. We are having our second social media policy ad hoc meeting tonight.
I know we're just waiting for a couple of people. Yeah, here we go. I think I can promote Commissioner Shea.
Oh, there we go.
I think the problem is that he's on his phone. Commissioner Shea, if you can hear us, I'm trying to promote you to panelist. One more time. Okay, here we go. And yay, he's through.
Thank you.
Okay, so Commissioner Shea, for your purpose, since you're on the phone and you're not looking at the screen, you have more or less your full panel. Vice Chair is on, Lieutenant Turner's on, Ms. Anne Janks and Ms. Peter Parsley. We are missing Chair Regina Jackson. She's running just a little bit late. Let's pick up. So just as a bit of an update and to remind everyone, last meeting, this panel discussed, oh, of course, and Director Flynn. I'm so sorry, I should also check and make sure that Director Flynn is able to get in. As a reminder, last week, this panel discussed very general edits to the document. Lieutenant Turner, thank you so much for turning those around. A new iteration of that document was, Director Flynn, nice to have you join us. Sorry, I sent the panelist invites a little late. So you're working on a new iteration of or a next version, a next iteration of the policy. I have not posted that yet, but I will. I'll try and keep them updated as we move through red line edits. I'd like to check with the commissioners and see if there's a thought as to where to start. I shared some ideas offline, but where would you like us to begin from? And maybe actually to the full panel.
Well, I could say that I did appreciate this suggestion that we start with the most important sections and work our way, considering that we are up against some time constraints to get this one in. So you had said sort of going line by line and starting with section, I believe you said it was D.
Yeah, sorry, for the purpose of the and go Vice Chair, can I take comment from Anne Janks has her hand up?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Janks.
So it's a little bit to me inverted to start talking about specific language when we haven't actually talked about the larger questions about what we want to have in the policy. There was some discussion about whether it was a policy just trying to address social media or whether it was trying to address all public expressions. Lieutenant Turner said, oh, there's going to be a separate policy on public expressions. I asked if we could see where that draft is to understand, because obviously these are two things that are going to have to be aligned. I haven't seen that. I'm hoping to still. But it seems to me that like there's a larger conversation to have about what it is broadly that we want to have in this policy. One of the things that I ran across recently is a recommendation from the Urban Institute about what policies should have in them. And one of the things that they discussed was having a social media manager or a public expression manager whose responsibilities include keeping up to date with issues that come up, which obviously, had that been in place, would have been tremendously helpful in terms of the Instagram scandal, where nobody was paying any attention or really appreciating the nature of the post, right? So I just feel like, aren't there some larger things that we might want to talk about?
Is there a way of doing larger things as well as, and let me just fill in the blanks, because I shared some ideas with the commissioners in the hopes of then sharing them. I'm going to come off video because this feels impersonal. In the hopes of sharing them with this panel. One of the ideas is we take it section by section, and what the vice chair was referring to was this notion of perhaps taking them out of order and starting with the most pertinent, most critical, and that would be rules, section D, and then considerations, section C, definitions, and I'm happy to share the list. So that was a thought. I wonder if there's a way of doing both, Ms. Janks, just given the fact that we've got to move. You know, ideally this commission would like to see a draft policy by April, this draft in front of them for review by April. That gives us about, I think, forgive me, I counted, I don't have the math in front of me, but like, you know, a few, what is that? We're February, 6 weeks. So for the sake of efficiency, could we do both? I think that given I understand that you haven't received the policy around expression, Lieutenant Turner, please if you could share that more widely. So absent that, I thought we'd landed, and I'll defer back to the commissioners, that this was a social media policy. Like, that's what the OPD needs, and that's certainly what's needed for compliance in the NSA. And I'll stop and make sure that I'm not speaking out of turn. Vice Chair, Commissioner Shea.
Mr. Pursley?
Yes, thank you. Just briefly, I'd like to affirm what Ms. Janks just said. Personally, I have not really satisfied myself that I have a good sense of what should be in this document. Partly that's because I haven't put the time in that I need to do that. I'll certainly be able to do it by our next meeting, because you know, the thing that I always look for is what's not in here. But that might be raised by the larger question that Ms. Janks has put: what all do we want in this document? Is it just social media? Or I think, you know, we've already expressed, you know, the desirability of having, you know, a larger net, so to speak, in terms of expressive behavior. That's all I've got to say on that. Just wanted to affirm that, you know, I want to satisfy myself personally that, you know, I'm comfortable with the scope of the document, and I'm just not there yet.
Thank you, Mr. Pursley.
But that doesn't preclude us, you know, going into whatever you'd like to do tonight in terms of like detailed language, whatever, line by line, whatever. But I just want to affirm that that issue is still on the table, so to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Pursley. Lieutenant?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, so just from the perspective of the department and just for everyone's kind of situational awareness, I think what the department's responding to at least is the imperatives from you know, the judge, the Honorable Judge Warwick, who in the CMC, the case management conference the last time, was pretty explicit on the expectations that he had of the department. And so this is kind of stemming from the recommendations that are in that public synopsis of the Instagram case. And so it does request, and the judge has made it clear that he would like to see this a social media policy, a policy on the use of cell phones and computer equipment, and then also the sort of anti-discrimination, anti-harassment mirrored on AI 71 and Administrative Instruction 71 policy from the department. Those three are policy that he specifically called out in the last case management conference. So that's why they're kind of written like that, and that's why they do have the content that they do. I do understand that there, you know, there would be the desire to maybe expand it. On the other hand, we, as Ronnie had said, that we are a little bit under both the deadline and the expectation from the court. And so that's I think from the department's perspective, what our preference would be is to nail down a policy that talks about social media, understanding that there could be other discussions at other
Yeah.
points about expression and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, yeah. My sense is that this is an opportunity that's not going to come around soon again. And I understand too, though, that our primary objective and duty is to satisfy the court's expectations.
Before I call on you, Anne, I haven't read the policy. I actually felt like it was a really good start and pretty comprehensive. And I had mentioned before that part of why I was on this ad hoc is because I had to create, policy for, having been a principal. And this is way more comprehensive than what we had. And social media was huge, right, for high school students. So what I don't want to do is something we used to say, gold-plated toilet seats, right? Like we have to get something that is acceptable and pushing the envelope. And there's I heard some very bold ideas in there, and I don't want to start from scratch if we're up against this deadline, because we can always come back to any policy and make adjustments and changes to it. So I wouldn't want to sort of go back to the drawing board from the beginning and make something other than a social media policy.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not suggesting that we go back to the drawing board from the start. I'm just saying that I want to be comfortable that I've done my duty, and I haven't done it yet. I'm just telling you that. That's all I'm talking about is me. All right. In terms of what I expect myself to do in this capacity.
Thank you. Anne Jenks.
I think that my approach to things generally is to not decide in advance that something can't be improved. Certainly, if we come down to a deadline and we need to finish cranking it out, we can always do that. But I don't think that on February 1st, we have to start by saying that we can't do something better because we don't have time. And I don't mean to say that that's what you were attempting to say, but I still think there is some time to look at some of these underlying issues. I did read what came out of the report, and I just don't necessarily think that the judge meant I only want a social media policy and I don't want it to say anything else. And as I've started to read about social media policies, and I've started to look to some of the subject matter experts, what I've been hearing and what makes a lot of sense to me is the idea that we don't really know where social media is going. And it actually, we could end up spending a lot of time trying to define social media and define the activities, because we don't know. If we'd been writing a social media policy 10 years ago, we wouldn't necessarily, I don't remember if Vine was around, but we wouldn't necessarily have known what to say about videos. We would have been talking about, photos, and so some of what I've heard from the subject matter experts is, if you just talk about the expressions, you're covering social media in a way that you are less likely to have to come back, right? And yeah, we can always come back and fix things, but we can also try to make them as good as possible on the first round.
Yeah.
Jesse.
So here's my take. We're writing a social media policy. That was a directive of the court.
Right.
I get that we could do better. I think that there are different ways that we can approach that.
Okay.
We don't necessarily have to say expand right now this policy into an expressive conduct policy.
Yeah.
Instead, we could have the department commit to, and we all agree to, values that a shared expectation of values that we think should be covered.
Yeah.
Maybe those values might be covered by both expressive conduct and social media policy, but we should at the very least agree on those values.
Yeah.
And then And then we can distill down to later sections, talk about one, what sorts of mediums does that apply to? And that might be the more general consideration. And then two, what are the specific rules with respect to that medium? And in this instance, it's social media policy. So the values that we're looking at, I think, might be a centering point where we can all agree and might have cross applicability to other areas of expression and lay the groundwork for those other policies rather than trying to expand
Yeah,
what is essentially a court directive at this point.
right.
That's
Yeah.
a suggestion.
Yeah.
That's a,
Okay, can I, in the interest then of keeping us moving, instead of talking about what we want to talk about now, is it, can we start perhaps for the next half hour until 7? I'm not giving us a timeline, I'm just trying to like contain it. Talk about perhaps some of the more ideas that Mr. Pasty I heard, and Ms. Janks, I heard you say that you want to share,
Yeah.
and then perhaps talk about sectioning it off. I'd like to help facilitate this
Yeah.
and also keep it moving, whichever way we go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Pasty.
If I could, yes, thank you. I just want to reiterate what I said and limit it to a social media policy. I'm still not satisfied that I'm comfortable with the categories within the social media topic itself. So I just
Okay.
want to clarify it. I'm not trying to blow up the process or,
No worries. So, okay,
Okay.
take us away. Segue
Okay,
into that
great.
discussion. So you're not satisfied. What's
Gotcha.
missing for you?
Just wanted to clarify that. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a sense of what's missing for you? I hear that
No,
you're
I
not-
don't. That's what I have to do. I have to go through it. I still haven't reviewed the 6 or 7 other policies. I've got to do that. I'm sorry I've been behind on this.
No, it's fine. It's definitely very hefty work. Let's
Okay.
acknowledge that this is a lot to read. I
Yeah.
do acknowledge that. Okay.
Okay.
I can tell you what's missing.
Okay, let's go.
So, I mean, to me, and I certainly appreciate the idea of looking for some policies of neighboring police departments, but several of those policies I thought were severely lacking. So I don't really think that there's yet been looking at policies in terms of what are the best policies, which I don't even think is where I think that, and it was somebody at the San Francisco Police Commission who said this to me, you don't just want to look at what the policies are that other departments landed on, because they have stronger requirements that they have to essentially negotiate with the police department than Oakland does, right? But we haven't even really identified, in my mind, what jurisdictions have done interesting work in terms of what social media policies they've come up with. Other jurisdictions like Oakland have had pretty substantial social media scandals, social media or texting scandals. So somebody may have done that. It seems like what's been looked at thus far is very much the kind of the police policy type folks, Police One and all of those folks. But there are definitely some subject matter experts out there who do not come from a police perspective, who have also looked at social media as a policy issue in police departments. And I just don't think that has been looked at. I tried to share a couple of documents, but to me, when I say I don't, that I think there's a conversation to be had about what it is that you want to have in the document, I think that the first step is to, since we're not going to have the time to do it, to become experts, to at least have that conversation and look at what other folks in the field who have had more time have considered with it.
Can I just take us back to the call to question, which is what is it that we want in this policy? what is it that we want it to cover? What are the values that we want to make sure this policy covers and either prohibits or encourages? And how do we write that into the policy? I understand that we may not have the best base to work on. We have a collection of policies that have been put together from neighboring jurisdictions, but we're trying to create something that is specific to Oakland and trying to something that is perhaps maybe cutting edge, maybe trying to push the boundaries, whatever it may be. What is that, right? What is that we're looking for, if that's what we are looking for?
Well, certainly one thing that I would like to see come out of this policy is clarity for the officer on the beat. You know, I'm still not satisfied that officers have a clear direction on use of their own personal systems. And that's, I mean, that's getting into their personal lives, basically. And I don't know how I think we should somehow come up with a simple way to deal with that rather than try to get into regulating that area. It's just you know, a limit that I think this policy should have. We need to be very careful about people's personal lives. That's all I have to say about that right now. Yeah.
I'd like to just acknowledge that Director Flynn, thank you so much, submitted an edit. I just shared it in the chat.
Okay.
Director, would you mind sharing the section if you have it in front of you? I think you're muted. I know years of this, right? And still.
I'm going back and forth between screens, so
No worries.
I will find the section for you. I'll look.
Thank you so much.
I do have it open. I just have to look at the doc.
No worries. And I can also check after and make sure that, Lieutenant, you have some reference.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to digress the conversation.
Yeah, Ryan, if I maybe could also chime in on Commissioner Shea's question, which I really think was very important and helpful. I'm in agreement with Mr. Persley. I do want some clarity for the officers, and I think the department, both the command, you know, the executives, management of the department and line staff want very, very clear direction.
Yeah.
You know, on what it is that's acceptable, what is not, simple things, but at the same time, you know, an understanding and respect that we are dealing with human beings who have a life other than being a police officer.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that is one of the things that we are really trying to do, is make sure that we have whole people. You know, one of the things that I say, you know, in my training is hurt people hurt people. We do not want hurt people as our police officers, because they sow harm in our community. So we want them as whole people, but we want them to be responsible and thoughtful. And we want good guide rails or guardrails in place for if they are not doing that. So that from the department's perspective, there of course is, you know, when I put on the hat of the chief, there is, you know, this response to the judge, and, you know, there was a problem, a serious problem, and now, you know, there is a reaction. But beyond that, yeah, the proper understanding and balancing of, you know, the need for, you know, these officers who have these very awesome powers, and the ability to really sow harm in our community, at the same time, the acknowledgement that they're human, the acknowledgement that we are trying to make them successful.
Okay. Now we have a value, we have sort of what it is that we want. I think we're in agreement, or at least between Mr. Persley and Lieutenant Turner. What are the sections that reflect that? Do our sections reflect that? Does our policy say exactly what you said? We want to recognize that people are whole people, that we want guardrails, but people have to have their own private lives, but need to be able to exercise good judgment in sort of making these decisions, and this is what this policy sets forth.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to acknowledge that Chair Jackson has joined. Good evening, Chair.
Good evening. And I have my hand up, but I will come behind Anne and whomever else jumped, ahead of me.
I think one of those hands that is up is mine. And I do want to tag on to the thread that we were just having to say, and I know this is a delicate area, and maybe the place to deal with it isn't in a policy. But as a resident of Oakland, I want to know that OPD doesn't have white supremacists. I'm talking about avowed, active white supremacists among their ranks.
Yeah.
That, which is really a different vetting. It's not about this policy. It's about, are we making sure that we're not hiring KKK members? I'm not comfortable as a Black person in the city of Oakland thinking that we have those folks wearing guns and badges.
Yeah.
But I don't think all of that can be dealt with in a social media policy. So I want to acknowledge that. but I still want that reassurance. And that's what, when people post on social media in sympathy to these groups, then I have to believe that they're showing me who they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they may not be. They might have just made a stupid mistake. I get that. You might have just logged on to the wrong website at the wrong time. I understand it can be a mistake. But I think that that is a mistake that officers shouldn't be making, because I don't think we can have we can't have those people among our sworn officers.
Mhm.
So somehow or another, we need to make that clear to people. It's like,
Yeah.
we don't have white supremacists, people who are members of these organizations. We don't give them guns and badges, because Black people won't be safe if we do that. I mean, I'm making it way too blunt, but Black people and other people of color, perhaps Jewish people, perhaps gay people, won't be safe with those folks with guns and badges. So if you mess up on social media and start to look like you're among those folks, you could be putting your job in jeopardy, even if you're doing it on your private Facebook page.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter where you do it.
Mhm. Yeah.
If you start looking like KKK, you might have a problem,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know how. I want the police
Yeah.
department folks to help us, and the lawyers to help us sort through that.
Yeah, we're really talking personnel policy here, I think.
Mhm.
And it is beyond the social media document that we're trying to create. You're right. You know, it's bargaining issues as well. So it's a big topic. So again, we want to limit ourselves in terms of our, involvements.
But we might also want to warn officers that they could
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I think they're-
inadvertently end up under a very
Oh, Miss Flynn, your
yeah.
points need to be like, in big bold letters for everybody to read, and no misunderstanding about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim, Anne, is your hand still up? Your turn.
Yes. So I actually think that we can do harm to the officers by trying to be too delicate and too much, oh, I understand this is your personal time and such. The way that I think about it is when the use of the N-word, right? When people really started saying, this is unacceptable, it doesn't matter the context, like we're not getting into any conversations about it, right? This is a word that you don't use, right? And there were people who were like, oh, but why can't I? And blah, 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 blah. But what was really helpful about it is it was a very clear line, right? And I think that we actually do the officers more of a favor by giving them clear lines than by getting too mushy, because then we're not saying to them very, very clearly, it doesn't, I mean, I hope that we're not hiring officers who feel like they can't fully enjoy their lives if they can't say racist things. I hope. And there are a lot of occupations where you have to have some level of care in what you say. And I would advocate for us to draw as bright lines as possible. And I think, in fact, that we kind of need to figure out how to address the issue of joking and bantering that very much underlied not only the Instagram scandal, but the fact that OPD management couldn't seem to understand that it was a problem, right? So I would argue that it's actually not taking that much away from somebody to say that you can't express hate in your personal life. And if you do and it gets out, it's going to bring into question whether or not you can police constitutionally in Oakland, right? I think that it's more generous to do that in really bright lines than to make it kind of more fungible where people are less clear about it. And then there are all of these discussions about, oh, but I didn't say ER, I said A, and this and that and the other thing. You're just not supposed to say it, right? Whether you agree with it or not, it doesn't matter. This is how other people perceive it. Don't do it. And I think that the idea of having somebody whose charge is to be very aware of social media, this idea of having, I'm not sure social media manager is the right term, but in terms of like things that ought to be in this policy, the idea of having somebody who is really tracking what's going on with social media and has an understanding of trends. One of the things that was very interesting to me, I was talking to somebody who said, look, what makes it very hard to articulate what social media is there was this little green frog. The cartoonist who made it is horrified that it came to you can't even talk about the symbols. You can't talk about the organizations. The Boogaloo Boys didn't exist, and then suddenly they did, and then they killed some people, and now they don't. It's like everything is changing so rapidly that having a person whose assignment includes having some understanding of what's going on seems to me to be valuable and something that would have prevented the reaction to the Instagram scandal, the failure of management in the Instagram scandal.
Thank you very much, Anne. I wanted to raise a comment and I guess a question. I know that the police department does emotional intelligence training. I wonder how often they refresh. Lieutenant Turner, can you answer that question?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. The refreshment, it depends. We do have continued professional training that happens for the sworn officers every year, and included in that is some discussion and a block of instruction on emotional intelligence, conversations, procedural justice, and things like that. Now, that is a block that's usually about 2 hours, right?
Okay.
In a 40 hours. Now, we have not had standalone procedural justice. I know that's something that Chief Armstrong wants to do again. I think we're through the 3rd iteration, and we want to go on to additional ones, but each one of those training iterations is its whole thing. So we haven't done that for a few years.
Okay, and you all have completed the implicit, explicit bias training that Darlene leads, right?
That was mandated, I believe, through the city. And correct me if I'm wrong, Director Flynn. I know if I get a lot of.
Yeah, my trainings haven't been mandated. They've been, except for command staff at the time. It was mandated for them, but we haven't repeated it for command staff since the new command has been in place. So, so we need to do that, and we're in conversation about rebooting our training. But I happen to know that there's another round of implicit bias training coming, designed by Dr. Eberhardt, that I believe is going to be rolled out for all staff. I believe. I mean, I'm not. This is under the Stanford contract, and of course, she is the expert on implicit bias. I think it's called. Isn't it called the OPD Reset or something like that? Am I right? When's that going to start?
That's already started. So I know DC Lindsay has already started with that with Manager Beckman, and they have a small training cadre that they've started and are kind of piloting some of those with the hope that by the end of this year the entirety of staff will be.
And she's keeping me posted on that. You know, okay. I know about that because of my conversations with DC
Lindsay.
Yeah.
So then. 2 more questions. Well, 1 more question and 1 comment. The fact that your trainings have not been mandated across the city is problematic because we have certainly seen how implicit or explicit bias has been acted out in several different departments, permitting, that kind of thing. But the question that I have, and I do not know, Lieutenant Turner, how to measure this. You know, the comment about hurt people hurting people is it's reality. And they're, you know, as police officers police, they begin to change based upon the exposures they have, right?
Yes.
And, you know, I don't know that one, we want to wait until somebody actually goes into the therapist's office to be determined, you know, not thinking clearly or angrily or anything else. And the through line that I'm trying to identify, because what we'd like to do is prevent on that perspective, because it could be through your eyes, very easy to get angry at certain kinds of people, very easy to support the ideas that are already out there by clicking a button that says like. And the fact is that, you know, we all have our feelings about different things based upon our relationship with them, right? And I'm looking at this as more of a character thing, which is not quite the same as emotional intelligence, as well as a relationship with power. And I'm trying to figure out how to intelligently communicate how that's exhibited in terms of people having to be responsible for their actions, not just out on the street, but through this kind of invisible line called social media. And to your point about this being a, you know, personnel policy, it is, but to also Ann's point, and it's what we do with youth. It's, you know, you don't sugarcoat stuff. You know, it's kind of tough love, saying, look, we're going to tell you about it, then we're going to train you on it, and then if you get caught up, then it's going to be a problem. The problem is the getting caught up piece, because, you know, with such few police officers available, adding somebody to troll, you know, does not seem reasonable or even the best use of time based upon what supports you need out in there on the street, right? So I'm not sure that I've proposed anything, and I don't know if anything is kind of percolated, but I do see Tyfara's hand up, and she tends to take my words and make them, you know, these phenomenal research data things. So you have at it, Tyfara.
Oh, I don't know if I can live up to that. I was just raising my hand to just find out the process for if we have attendees in the audience with a hand raised, and if we were going to take chat or actual comments or what have you.
So the way this was set up, Tyfara, is that it's a one-way so that people can listen in. And then if they wanted to chat, we could facilitate their chat, but we can't do live response to the chat now. We would basically address the chat at the top of the next meeting because we won't always have Rania. So we're trying to set an expectation that people can have access to the information, that we'll get the chat, get the answers, and then be responsive, you know, immediately following in the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so Jesse.
I'm not going to live up to being able to reframe everything that you've said in a coherent way, but I would like to point out that we are basically talking about the values and ethics section right now as sort of starting point of what we want, what we want out of this policy, where it came from, sort of the historical context behind it, as well as the relationship aspect for OPD vis-a-vis the community and why this policy is needed. And I think that is where we should spend. I know that Rania, you had said the next 30 minutes, but perhaps since we're on this section, maybe we should be spending a bit more, just suggesting that.
On it, sharing my screen. I love it. Let's get in.
I do want to sort of try to get us to hone in on what Chair has said, because I think that is does very much get at the heart of what we're talking about. There's both a sort of a recognition that the officers' actions do matter, and how they are perceived by the community. That we want clear, bright line rules. We want them to know that these are the rules. We want them to be trained on them, and that violation of these rules is going to result in discipline, but not just discipline for discipline's sake, but that of the actual harm that is being caused by their actions to the community. I think this policy should reflect that. I don't know exactly how that's going to look or how that is said. Lieutenant Turner, I hope you're taking notes.
I had a question for the lieutenant. Lieutenant, is this boilerplate? Is some of this stuff because it's the department mission and stuff like that? Does the same language exist across all your policies? Out of curiosity, I'm trying to remember. I've seen something similar. I just don't know if it's word for word.
Yeah, good question. So yes, the mission that is taken from our strategic plan, and the mission that is directly come from Chief Armstrong. But actually, yeah, I think maybe in that beginning section, the first one where it talks about the command intent, I did really include some of the things that we've talked about in the last couple meetings. So both around guidance and rules, and some of the ways the department can address that our staff are humans and are going to be doing things like celebrating on social media, etc. But also some of the other things around the guardian mindset and the power relationships that exist here, and the harm that the either misuse of the power, but more in this context, the possibility or the way that it can be, someone's image can be tainted by their actions, and by the things that they say or do or express on social media, or in their expressions in general. Some of the things that Director Flynn was talking about last time.
Respectfully, and Chair, if you don't mind, I'm going to respond to a comment from Haley Hester. These draft policies exist on the Police Commission website through the ad hoc page. I'm sharing my screen right now, so I can't send you the link, but I will. Or feel free to email me and I will. I don't know about CPA. This is Police Commission right now, so I hope that helps. So then, Lieutenant Turner, I see that you already have a comment in your intro here. I wonder, do we need to add a thing? And I see that there is kind of like a moment of discussion for how this shows up how sentiment shows up in terms of policy language. Do we need to add more here, given the discussion that we've just heard?
Right. So yeah, if we could talk about, so that if you can see the second paragraph there, all the on the left side of your screen where you see that red line that's running vertical is all revisions made to the document from the last time that we spoke.
I can also show people the track changes. Give me just a second.
Yes, please. And so yeah, it's talking about, I know there was, we discussed both the guardian mindset and the power dynamics, and that needed to be discussed. And like Chair Jackson said, this is a difficult, because it's getting a policy document, which is typically pretty legalistic and formalistic, and then inculcating a mindset, which is much harder. The idea, and it's funny because I'm in a training class right now where we talk about how to provide training, and they ask and they say, when you're developing your training course, think about the problem you're attempting to address. Is it cultural, or is it training? If there's a cultural gap, training is not going to be the thing that addresses it. There are other things, or multiple trainings or something, but a training is specific. So very similar to a policy. And so I definitely agree with the chair's sentiments, and also a little bit with her, sort of frustration at not being able to really address that and come to grips with it, is how to address some of these things around culture. And so I think that this was sort of a start within some of the things that were discussed last week.
Thank you. I see Andrax and Peter personally have their hand up. I'm not sure who shot it up first, but first one off the mic gets to say things.
Go ahead, Ann.
We're both being too polite. I'm very interested in as much specificity as possible. I think that helps people. One question that I have about this broader discussion is the use of the term extremism. Given that we've seen a lot of police departments spend time following Antifa and Black Lives Matter, despite absolutely no indications that they were engaged in any extremist activity. I'm a little concerned about using that term rather than we had a conversation at the last meeting where I think that it was Director Flynn who was talking about protected groups, like defining some of the groups as opposed to, no, I'm completely mischaracterizing you. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. We did have that conversation, and I think that protected groups are a good way to go, but it's really about violence is what I think it's about more than anything else. It's about violence against anybody in an organized fashion that is unacceptable to me. But yes, of course, including protected groups. Yes.
Okay, first of all, I am opposed to hateful expressions that have no violence attached to them. If there's a flower group of white supremacists, I don't really care that all they're doing is braiding flowers in each other's hair while they talk about white supremacy. I understand the issue around violence, but this is about, for me, also, it's about expressions of hatred and white supremacy and racism and sexism. And I'm just concerned about using the term extremism. I've heard that it can pull a whole conversation away. And in fairness, what we're trying to do here, I think, is tell officers, you don't want phrases where the officer is saying, well, I'll tell you who I think an extremist is. It's those Black Lives Matter people. And then they're off in the wrong direction, and they're not really taking from this document what they need to take from it, which is, I don't really care what you think. These are the rules that you're going to have to follow.
Well, I did spend some time looking at that language because I was particularly interested in that. And I made some changes to stop saying extremist quite as often and instead lean into describing what the behaviors are that we are concerned about. So if you take a look at that language, I'm not saying it couldn't be defined better, but I think we are of like minds, and that is we want to be very clear about what the behaviors are or the affiliations are that we're concerned about so that they can't be misconstrued. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, just look at the language. I tried to get some of that extremist, relying so heavily on the category extremist and more into and left the other language there, but we could still do some more wordsmithing on it.
Yeah, and it could be that it's not really extreme if all your friends think the same way, right? I'm not sure who raised their hand first, Peter or Typhara.
It was Peter.
Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. Well, let me just respond to this discussion that's right on tap right now. I think Anna is right to point out her concerns about how extremism it can be turned in many different ways. I think using the term with explicit examples of what we're talking about, and even naming organizations such as, the Boogaloo Boys or whoever shot that federal police officer. Hey, we can name those people. I don't see why we shouldn't. That's just my comment on that. So more explicit, the better. People need to know what's prohibited, not just, the general idea of what's prohibited. And I just had one other comment about the command intent, a couple of paragraphs. First of all, I want to acknowledge that this is leadership's chance to assert leadership. And I make suggestions quite cautiously. But I was troubled by the use of the word balancing when it came to discussing the officers' rights and the needs of the department. Somehow that kind of suggests, if the department gets what it's looking for, the officers are going to have less rights. Or if the officers get more rights, the department is going to be dissatisfied. And I'll just read this out. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to write this as a comment, but I just thought of this language that it would read something like this, and I can do this in writing later. Provide the guidelines for the regulation and support of employee speech and expression consistent with the needs of the department. I mean, that's a little different. Not really critical language. I just want to throw that out there. I just don't like the idea of starting off with a dynamic, if it's a tug of war, that's what balancing kind of suggests to me. Teeter totter, and that's all I got to say about that.
Mr. Persley, I'd like to take down that sentence. Where would you have it?
Well, it would just be a couple of words. Let's say strike the word balancing and put the word support in there.
I don't.
A second sentence.
Second sentence. Thank you. Give me just a second.
Sure, go ahead. And of course, the officers want to take a look at this. It is changing it a little bit.
Strike balancing and replace with.
Support.
Thank you. Okay.
And then after the word expression in the third line, insert the word consistent.
Okay. I'm just going to put. I don't see it.
Okay. And I had just one more word in that second paragraph.
I'm so sorry. I'm still looking for your last one.
Oh, that's after the word expression.
In the third line, so not the third sentence.
Yes.
Expression, found it. Thank you. My bad. Sorry. Editing on the go. Sorry. Go ahead. After the word expression.
Insert the word consistent.
Excuse me. Okay.
And then in the second paragraph, third line from the bottom, the word including. I would strike that and put the word or. I think it's a little more clear.
Sorry, second paragraph.
Yeah, third sentence from the bottom. It says individual, including, acting. I would strike the word including and put the word or.
Yeah, I still can't see it. I'm sorry. Okay, I thought I could do this live. Please go ahead and just email me your edits and I'll make sure.
That's it on that. That's
okay.
I have no more on that. Thank you.
I didn't capture the last one, Mr. Persley, so if I can ask you just to
I'll email you that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And again, it's not critical. It's just a suggestion for clarity.
I think we're on to Tyfara.
Yes, thank you. So to Ann's point, it was actually I who was talking about protected classes of people last time. And it's just to point us toward that even if you consider Black Lives Matter extreme or any group that is even a group that might even be anti-police or anti-whatever, that if they're anti something that's not protected, then we're not concerned with that. So we're only concerned with groups that are anti-protected classes of people, because it is illegal to discriminate, it's illegal to harass, it's illegal to target these protected classes, so that it eliminates the confusion so that someone can't say, well, I think this is extreme. And it's like, well, there's a group of, white men who want to reclaim something, masculinity of some kind, that they're not a protected class. And so if somebody likes a thing that, you know, it just won't apply. It won't apply in this case. So that was the point of bringing in that suggestion. So I think it's a both and, that we can use words like extremism and say IE with lots of examples,
Yes,
and then also add concern with targeting protected classes of people.
right. And again, violence, that's the key too. Yeah,
That would be like a yes and violence and harassment, right?
yes,
Because it doesn't always get to
yeah,
it doesn't get to violence all the time. Sometimes
that's right.
it's
So
just-
it'd be violence or, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Okay, so I feel like we've captured some sentiment around intent. I'm going to go back to the not all markup, hang on, and take us perhaps, is it helpful to kind of take us back to the mission ethics portion?
We can do that.
Is that satisfied? Because we can just keep moving through.
Yeah, sounds good to
Okay.
me. What do you guys think?
In terms of the command intent, I actually think the most important thing in command intent is the sentence that begins with toxic, unreasonable, and inappropriate expression. I mean,
Yes,
all of this other language, I understand it's traditional policy, OPD language, but in terms of what an officer, in my mind, needs to understand, it's that any post that there are people in the community are going to read it and they are going to question that officer's ability to police them fairly, or it's going to cause them to question the police department's ability to police fairly in the community, is really what the entire policy is about. Whether they're guardians, whether they're this, whether they're that, you know, it's like, that's the point to me of this policy. If other people are going to look at what you're doing, then that's where the problem lies.
I'm not sure whose hands went up first, Lieutenant or Commissioner Shea.
Lieutenants did.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I really want to push back on that sentiment. You know, that things are that address you know, the way that we speak to our staff and the way that we try to address some of these other expectations that we have of our staff as sort of boilerplate. And it really, you know, I disagree with it being marginalized in that fashion. I understand the severity of both the issue and what we're trying to address, but I really disagree with marginalizing in that fashion. And, you know, what I think is really important, you know, is that we are not only just, you know, coming from a position of addressing a problem. This is forward looking and moving towards the future. You know, so this is a policy for everyone. This is not, you know, something just to find the worst of the worst and to, you know, I think I'm getting little off track here, but basically what I typically do when I create policy is try to appeal to the best angels of people's nature, and understanding that people will do things wrong. But I think it is not productive to sort of ignore some of these things that are inspirational and aspirational, and just focus on the prohibitions. Thank you.
Lieutenant Turner, Ann did put in the chat, can you speak about what you mean by marginalized? And then we'll go to Commissioner Shea and then Mr. Persley.
Yeah, I think that just the discussion that was just had right now, that, you know, that sort of saying that these other things in the command intent that, you know, those really, you know, and I don't have the direct quote, but are sort of boilerplate OPD things, as if it's not important.
Yeah.
That is very important to us. We command these officers, we run this organization with the hopes that it serves the community in the best possible light. We don't run this organization just so that because we need to look out for wrongdoers all the time. That I think I understand where it comes from, and there are people who are doing wrong, who have done wrong in the past in this organization, who will do wrong in the future. This is a large organization of over 1,000 people, but that is not the attitude from which at least I come when I command the officers and when I manage the organization.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. Commissioner Shea and then Mr. Persley.
We're not hearing you.
I feel like Commissioner Shea is distracted. Would you like to jump in, Mr. Persley, and then we'll take him when he's ready?
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to add my sentiments on these first two paragraphs in command intent, which again, I think is, I approach deferentially as leadership's opportunity to assert some direction. I thought the quality of those first two paragraphs was pretty good, and I'm a harsh critic. So I think I had a good reaction to the overall document, but I also think it could be a little more focused and hard hitting. Maybe that would go to Ms. Jenks's concerns about you know, what this is really all about. So I don't know, maybe if it could be, I don't know, maybe moved up a little more or something, but I think overall, I think it's a pretty damn good statement. Just want to say that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Shea?
Sorry about that. I'm back.
That's okay. Great. You're on.
I actually wanted to say that before Mr. Persley said that, but you know, when I look at the second paragraph, to me, it starts to get at what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That OPD does want to promote and expects all members of its department to have a guardian mindset, that the police hold an awesome power to both protect and to take lives, and that toxic, unreasonable, and inappropriate expression threaten the relationship of the department to the community and create the fear that awesome power is given will be misused. That is exactly some of the things that have been talked about in this meeting. Maybe not directly to the T of what everyone has said, but having police officers like posts of the Proud Boys or white supremacists, that causes the community to distrust the department and create fear because they hold that awesome power. They are liking groups that specifically threaten their existence, right? So I actually think that Lieutenant Turner did a very good job of crafting this second paragraph to get to what some of the things that we were talking about. And I just wanted to highlight that. It's not going to capture every single point, but I do think that it certainly captures the sentiment that we're thinking of. We could probably connect it a little bit more to what the chair was talking about, you know, emotional intelligence and sort of each individual officer's judgment. But, you know, I think it's a strong paragraph. It certainly gets to what we're talking about.
I agree. Excellent, Lieutenant Turner. Thank you, Mr. Persley. Kudos, Lieutenant Turner.
Yeah, good job.
Lieutenant, can I start it on its own paragraph so it reads, so it pops up?
Yeah, and I do I hear what Ann is saying as well, that you know, this is important. This is why we're here, and you know, it's always frustrating for me, someone who has not screwed up, to then have the others who have screwed up. But they really were like, they made a huge problem, not only for me and the rest of the staff, but for our community. So, you know, that needs to be upfront as well. So you know, this is a balancing act. We have, you know, I have a lot of staff who kind of feel like, well, you know, why am I being targeted? Or, you know, but on the other hand, it's like those people, we are not being targeted. Those people did something wrong and now paint us with a brush. And so we have to make sure that we make it very clear what is unacceptable to all of us. So, you know, understanding that as well.
Anne has her hand up.
I'll tell you what I have heard about the Instagram scandal in talking to other community members about it, was a much deeper concern about the fact that nobody else in the department seemed to understand what the problem with those posts were. And those posts, at least the ones that I've seen, some of them apparently were so offensive that they weren't published, didn't talk about the Proud Boys. They didn't talk about, you know, the Klan or anything else. They just said racist and sexist and hate-filled things that were unconnected from a particular group. Right? Nobody was taking pictures of themselves in a pointy white hat. So, you know, it was very much ideas that were disconnected to a particular group. But the issue was much more that OPD management did not seem to have a way of handling the situation that understood its gravity and addressed it. And that is not about the knuckleheads who did it, right? Knuckleheads are knuckleheading, that's gonna happen. But the question, I mean, what really concerned the folks that I've talked to about it was the fact that management didn't seem to think that it was a problem. And that, you know, the way that I approach things like policy, just to be clear, is like, there's the paragraph talking about, oh, this doesn't affect any of your other free speech rights, is longer than the language about what they ought not be doing, right? And I've spent a lot of time with the people who read policies and who go through the training, and I sit with them at lunch afterwards when they roll their eyes and say, oh yeah, well, whatever. And so that's where I come from with this, in terms of like reading it and hearing what I think the guys are gonna say at lunch afterwards. You know, it's not just the knuckleheads who did it, unfortunately. It's also the folks who said, oh, this is just boys will be boys and this is just banter and it's not important. And we can't lose track of that.
Thanks, Anne. I have a response to you, but I'll say it after Commissioner Shea, sorry.
I'm going to repeat this a lot of times during this ad hoc, but I'm going to put the question back into your court, Anne. What do we do in this policy to address that if we can? The latter part is about having very clear guidelines and rules that if broken, or if not taken seriously and thereafter broken, results in discipline, right? But how do we put into this policy, or what do you want to see in this policy to address the first part, which is the perceived attitudes of command staff?
I don't think that you write into the policy something different for command staff, right? I mean, I think it's just the same policy and you write it, and then it's an issue of essentially enforcing it for everybody, I guess. I haven't really ever thought about addressing command staff separately. But what I was reacting to is just the idea that, well, there were some knuckleheads and we can't be looking for people to misbehave. We've got to be hoping that people behave. Well, I think management was very much hoping everybody was behaving. And as they misbehaved, they were saying, oh no, it's just banter, right? So what I'm saying is, it's not, we can't minimize what happened, because it was, in my mind, and from what I have heard from other people, taken as much more serious because nobody seemed to think it was a problem, right? And that's, I'm just reacting to the idea that there were a couple of knuckleheads out there who took life on some things they shouldn't, right? And so that's what I'm not saying that you write something separate for command staff. I think you write one policy, and hopefully you hold the command staff to enforcing that policy in the future.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Shea?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So to Ann's point, I do believe that there were some people that thought that there was a lot wrong with the posts. And I had the, I guess, the fortune to see copies so that I actually understood what was being, said and presented. And, I think that the largesse of it is that it was exceptionally immature. I could see the silly, ness that they were trying to come across with, but there is some underlying, extreme disrespect, perhaps anger toward those folks in power who are making life more difficult because we are, reining in the, we are reducing the flexibility and reining in more oversight and creating more rules and, all of that kind of thing. The bigger challenge, and I don't know, I don't think Strength Finders and Myers-Briggs can help you understand how immature, how silly, how stupid concocting images like those and the underlying messages are. I mean, they're terribly unprofessional, but in your home life, if we all may have different ways of dealing with what we think is funny. I hear dry humor, I'm like, it ain't funny to me, but it's hilarious to some other people, right? What might be funny to women may not be funny to men, blah, blah, blah. But I think the bigger issue, and of course we ran out of time, so we couldn't, really have the opportunity to discipline maybe all the folks that should have gotten disciplined, was this effort to cover it up. Because not only was it an exceptional embarrassment, but you can't misunderstand it. It's very clear. And so I guess my point is, I definitely feel like emotional intelligence and character and all these things are exceedingly important, especially your relationship with power. But I don't quite know how to put in here that you should not be immature. I mean, it's just silly, stupid, and part of me thinks that, something like that should be in there because maybe they don't get it when you speak over the head, emotional intelligence, you don't understand what that is. Implicit bias, you don't understand, don't care, whatever. But it's like, obviously we can't say don't do stupid stuff because maybe, their whole crew of people does stupid stuff and they laugh about it. Lieutenant Turner, you seem to be kind of nodding your head and being with me. How do we speak to that? Because part of it is you got to catch people. The other part is, I want to not use expletives because they're just coming up. The guy that had these thoughts was already canned. So this was aggravated in his effort to, again, from an immature perspective, throw darts at all the people that were in charge of his termination. You got something for me, Lieutenant Turner? I'm sorry, I can't get it out better than that.
I don't know. And I hear you, because don't be stupid is, I'll tell you, like, that's what a lot of us, who are older and have been here for a while, like, and the union, when these things happen, I mean, every at least when I've gone to continuing professional training as an officer and sergeant for the past few years, the union has come in every time and said, stay off of social media. Nothing you say on there is going to be useful at all. It just does nothing. And yet people continue to do it. And, you know, it's frustrating. I'm a little bit in your same boat of, I'm not sure how to, you know, do that. And I think I will say this, that I think Chief Armstrong is trying with a lot of the things that he is doing. So when you talk about not just training, not just any one policy, it's Project Reset. It's, you know, partnering with these different agencies to get anti-bias and anti-discrimination training. It's making sure that we're working with the Department of Race and Equity and Director Flynn on getting this stuff right. It's making sure we get this data on, you know, if there are systemic problems in our internal affairs, you know, outcomes or things like that. It's everything. It's a culture, you know, in that unfortunately mirrors America, right, in many respects. That's the realistic. You know, that we draw from a pool that is these are not our people that we get from Mars. We get them from America, and they, you know, unfortunately, they mirror some of our best qualities, and they have some of our worst. So I don't know. I think it is really continuing to, you know, do a lot of things, and there are different ways to do it. I acknowledge that there are some that are much heavier on the prescriptive side and discipline. That works for some people. I don't respond well to that, but others do. And you know, some people will not. You'll be as nice as you can. As soon as you turn your back on them, they will misbehave again. And you know, those people need to be drummed out. So yeah, a long story short, I'm not quite sure the answer, but I know that you know, the chief and we are working on it. But it is more than one policy. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. Thank you. I'm not sure whose hand went up first, whether it was Ann or Darlene. So please monitor yourselves. Let me know.
Well, I was going to take a slightly different turn. So, Anne, if
Okay.
you had more to add on this, I mean, it's related, but Anne might have been more in the vein.
Go ahead, Ann.
I am coming over to the chair and Lieutenant Turner's side. This is a policy for the knuckleheads. And if it's a policy for the knuckleheads, that means that we have to say very, very clearly, very explicitly, over and over, the key things that we care about, because the knuckleheads that I have known and loved, and I've raised 2 teenage boys, so I have loved knuckleheads. You know, they don't really listen to your guardian talk. Okay, and I'm sorry if I'm marginalizing it, but we are talking about the knuckleheads, right? And the knuckleheads need to hear, it doesn't matter that you thought it was private. It doesn't matter that you thought it was just funny. It doesn't matter, you know, it matters how other people are going to view it, other people who lack a sense of humor, other people who are overly sensitive from your perspective as a knucklehead, right? And if you saw it and you did not report it, it's as if you wrote it.
OMG, knucklehead
Those
is the
are
word.
the messages that knuckleheads need to hear. Does it mean that they will then behave correctly, Lieutenant Turner? No, it does not. But Lord knows we've given it our very best effort. And so that's what I'm looking for, is absolute clarity, no ambiguity, nothing where you can say, well, there's 3 paragraphs about guardianship, so that must be the most important. And the paragraph on my rights to free speech is longer than telling me not to say things. I mean, that is literally how knuckleheads engage with documents. So I'm on the chair and Lieutenant Turner's side now.
Well, thank you for the magic word. It really was knucklehead. So thank you. Appreciate that. We have a line forming. So Darlene, then Commissioner Shea, then Vice Chair Malele.
I was going to actually hope that Commissioner Shea would weigh in on what I'm going to say now. And it is related to what Ann just said. And I do agree with her. I think that it's really important that we think about that we're doing this because of people who don't act sensibly, who don't use good judgment. I mean, the reason we're here is because people didn't, and we can call them knuckleheads or whatever we want to call them, but they are people that did not use good judgment. And I'm a little worried about the sandwich we have going here. I like the way the language is evolving. Obviously it's getting clearer and more firm, and I like it. I like where we're going. But we got a sandwich that says, but of course, we're not going to restrict your freedom of speech. And this is a point that is confusing to a lot of people out there, not just police officers. A lot of people across the country who've lost their jobs because they did something on social media or publicly, and then went back to the office and were told to pack their things because it showed up on social media. Maybe they didn't even post it, but they got filmed doing something inappropriate. They go back to the office and folks say, hey, we just can't have you working here anymore because this company just can't back up what you just did in public. That is not an infringement on their freedom of speech. They are free to do and say whatever they believe in, but you don't necessarily get to keep the job that you have. And how you talk about that, I feel like we're confusing that message here a little bit still, and we need to parse it out. And I don't know the right words exactly to hit, but it's like, yes, you always will have your freedom of speech. You could lose your badge and lose your gun and lose your job and lose your pension. You will still have your freedom of speech. You just don't get to work up in here with those attitudes or those behaviors. And I think that's legal because it's been exercised all across the country. If this isn't consistent with the values of this organization, you might not be able to work here anymore. But we're not taking away your freedom of speech. You can stay on social media. You can take pictures of yourself in a white hood if you want to. That is not against the law. To portray yourself on social media as a blatantly, white supremacist, that's legal. You can do that, but you might not be able to work here. And I feel like we haven't quite clarified that because we go back and forth between saying, don't do this, but of course we wouldn't do anything to infringe on your freedom of speech. So I think we need to, I'm looking to the lawyers now because I'm not one. And I know that there's perilous ground here, but I also know that there's a difference between being free to post on social media anything you want to and being able to work in certain capacities.
Yeah, up in here.
After doing that.
Got it. Thank you. That's excellent. Commissioner Shea?
I'll make 2 suggestions to Darlene's point and then make a comment about Ann's comments. I think either third paragraph goes out or goes or is higher up, and the last line of the paragraph says exactly what Darlene said. Right? If we want the last thing, when it comes to people's memories, reading, listening, whatever it might be, primacy and recency, first and last, right? The first, I think, gets to why we have it. The last paragraph, hopefully, will get to why it's important. And perhaps the middle portions are either going to be a pared down version of you can maintain your rights, but you can't work here if you're going to do these things, or we don't have it at all, or we have it in some other section, right? Some section somewhere sandwiched in the middle that says, by the way, these don't infringe on your constitutional rights. And on a daily basis, I'm fighting for people's constitutional rights, and that hurts me to say, but I get it. I will, as to Ann's point about being extremely specific, it strikes me that, outside of these primacy and recency effects, if we were talking about knuckleheads, right? I don't think they're going to be reading command intent. I think they're going to be reading the rules and trying to make sure that they don't break those rules. So I think it makes a lot of sense to be very clear, to be very explicit, but not necessarily in the command intent portion, specifically in that here are the rules, right? And I think that is a different section that we will get to in one of our later sessions. And I hope that those very explicit rules everyone will have in mind. But I don't think we get into the nitty-gritty right here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Commissioner Shea.
I'm so sorry, Chair. Commissioner Shea, you had talked about moving paragraphs around. Can you repeat? Can I do that now? Can you repeat that?
Last paragraph to second.
Toxic and toxic. That one.
No, nothing in this policy is intended to prohibit or infringe.
Okay.
Second paragraph.
You want it pulled up?
Yes. And some sentence at the end about, to Darlene's point, these, how, something strong. I'll leave it to lieutenant's discretion. I think we're all on the same page about it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Vice Chair Malele.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to flag that, I believe that we need this policy. I mean, it's not going to be what determines culture, right? People do that. It's going to help us hold people accountable and have a framework to actually take action when things happen. And to that point, it's not even the officers that need to fully grasp. It needs to be written in such a way that the people who represent officers can't prevent us from holding them accountable. So I would want to make sure that legal looks at this and has thought through, because then I don't want to use the term knucklehead. I'll just say inexperienced professional.
You being nice.
The inexperienced professional might not know how to get themselves out of trouble from making a mistake like this, but we have very experienced professionals who will get them out of trouble from making mistakes, and make it very hard to hold people accountable. So the language needs to be tight enough so that when things happen, and they will, we can respond and nip it in the bud and take care of it.
So inexperienced professional, which is very kind, frames it in a way that still clarifies that they don't know what the hell they're doing. But anyway, let me pull myself back out of that. It needs to be simple language for simple people, right? For those that might not get it. So I get that. Thank you both, Commissioner Shea and Vice Chair Malele. And what we also know is that the speed of trust is slow, just like breaking toxic culture. It takes a long time. And I'm just trying to figure out, Darlene, do you know what out there changes minds? Or is it that you just keep chipping away at it?
Well, it's slower. I'll just put it that way. It is a slower kind of change. And I think it's a combination of persuasion and good, clear policy. So it's partially being really clear with your policies so that they are fair and just and are geared to produce the outcomes that you want to have, that they're outcome based. I think that's the conversation that we're having. And then it takes a while to organize people around the conversation internally. I mean, I really think this is what my work is, which is a little different than just writing policy. Is like, we want to build out a critical mass of employees in the police department and in every department in the city, not just the police department, that is working with us to create a new culture. It takes people participating in the development of that new culture. And that's what the work that our department does focuses on. It's like, how many people can we get participating in these kinds of conversations so that these kinds of conversations aren't just happening in the, in the realm of where they tend to happen, which is leadership, commission, those kind of things. And that's why we form equity teams in the departments that represent, across the organization about how do we move this conversation about the culture change that is needed in our department, whatever department that is, including the police department, in order to be in alignment with fairness and justice. Every department has gaps in that area, not just OPD. So we build out that conversation and we work to press it across the organization. So it's less command and control and more collaborative, and you start with the willing and you persuade others to that it's in their best interest or that there's value in their also becoming part of that change movement. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's why it takes longer, because it is not something you can just order from the top down. And so this part that we're doing here really matters, that we do the policy well. And then it is the secondary question is, now how do we get people in our department to believe in this and to share the values that are espoused by this policy. So it's like a two-part,
Yeah,
it's 2 parts. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that we hope that it's extrinsic. No, we hope that it's intrinsic, but it has to be extrinsic to them. Some reward is not good enough just because it should be. Okay, but the reward is you get to keep your job. Okay,
But ultimately, the reward will be when we get more maturity behind this, you will get to get promoted and you will get to be the leadership in the future. You tie things like promotion and access to advancement to your command of race and justice, or in the police realm, you would call it maybe constitutional policing, but in a real way, constitutional policing where the rubber meets the road, which it didn't happen in this case, right? This scandal, it went off the rail. So those sorts of folks probably wouldn't be first in line for promotions, right? And I know they wouldn't be, but necessarily, but we can do more because we're not very clear about who gets promoted and who doesn't. I mean, we don't have the best criteria in place for that either. So you begin to build out the criteria. So you back it up with your various pieces of infrastructure. So it becomes more meaningful in the lives of the officers and the non-sworn staff as well.
absolutely. Thank you. I see Anne's hand is up. Anne, are you muted?
As I think I'm the only white person that at least is not in the visitors section. So speaking for my people for a quick moment, one of the things that is really quite helpful in changing culture is in making people feel very isolated if they have unacceptable beliefs, where they do not believe that they can express their beliefs. They don't, the culture of racism or sexism and intolerance is not strengthened when people can't say what they think and feel confident that that will be accepted, right? And if I have to worry that my colleague in the police car with me, if I say racist things to him, he's going to report me, then I don't say them. And then the new person just out of the academy is not awash in intolerance when they join the force. And I realize that this isn't quite as high-minded as what Director Flynn was talking about, but I do believe that just getting to a point where people don't believe that they're allowed to say it is quite helpful in changing culture as well.
Thank you for that, Anne. And I also recognize that, much like Darlene mentioned, I can't remember what the term was, but buddies, that even if there were a pairing inside the police department, that people gravitate to other people who think the way they do. And so they have these attraction cliques, if you will. Are there, Lieutenant, or does it make sense to have those who are emotionally intelligent and demonstrate character, do they ever buddy up with the new folks? Or actually it almost needs to be the older folks, because some of the older folks in the department were around before the NSA or lived through the NSA, and maybe some of them just didn't get caught, I don't know, that are still more kind of SWAT minded and the escalation oriented rather than de-escalation. Now again, I'm speaking out of turn because I'm certain that some people are still there, because we still have people retiring after 25 and 27 years. But what I'm trying to get at is, do we have efforts by either buddying up with folks who are of the new vision for OPD, in order to, you know, try and break down the comfort of hanging, you know, with your, whether it's a partner or somebody else who is, can be complicit. Is there
Yeah.
anything like that? Yeah.
Yeah, we do, Chair. So we start out in the police academy, right? We do mentorship, you know, starting there. And so with the, you know, the easiest mind to change is one that has not yet been formed, right, or had been imprinted upon. And so that is low hanging fruit. We understand that those people have no policing experience. They're coming in fresh, and so that's the best time to address a lot of these things. And, you know, at the same time, we're fighting against some of the other issues that we have with immaturity in young people and things like that. So, you know, also we do have some other ways, right, in terms of and these are things that probably aren't as formal as they should be. You know, mentorship within the department as a whole, addressing some of these things. You know, as we talk about the risk management and the ways people address, we do a lot of data-driven things, and you'll see that as we start looking into these other policies like the risk management meetings and things. It's really a lot. You can tell whether an officer, you know, from their data, who they're stopping, what the stop outcomes are, and things like that. I'm not sure that necessarily we're doing as good of a job of getting into some of these beliefs. You know, some of them are ones that are misconceptions, and some of them are ones where their beliefs are unacceptable, and it's really hard to do that from a data-driven thing. That really takes time to you know, to make a contact and a connection with that person. So there's always give and takes. I think the department is working on that. They are looking at things. For instance, I know Chief Armstrong reviews every packet, for instance, of any officer who applies to be a field training officer, right? Because that's the next step after the academy is the field training unit, right? So there was a reorganization of the training section, which includes both the academy and the field training officers. So again, low hanging fruit, doesn't deal with some of these folks that you mentioned who've been here for a while, but you know, a way to at least start the process, you know, and understanding that that also it takes informal leadership and, you know, discussions with people, you know, understanding that there are some who come from different political viewpoints, and they will think that some of these discussions about you know, banning any sort of extremist content or something somehow applies to them. And, you know, understanding the difference, explaining nuance, you know, those are things where it takes that sort of leadership and mentorship. So I do think that it is coming along with these things like Project Reset and the equity groups that we're working on, inclusion of all staff in being part of the solution. But it is slow, but it is coming.
With the Project Reset and these different trainings, are there pre and post surveys to see if people actually change their way of thinking or are, you know, considering different ways to engage after they've received the training? I mean, again, I come with a youth focus, much more difficult to change the minds of, you know, adults. But I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's that formalized. I think that'd be a good idea. I'd want to float that to Manager Beckman and I know Deputy Chief Lindsay, as well as, you know, what are we doing to really measure these things? You know, and are we looking at whether people understand what it is, the concept that we're trying to convey to them? Are their attitudes changed? You know, do they have a different perspective on their interactions, whether it's with the community, with their fellow officers, or with staff, the rest of the city staff? I'm not sure. So I think that is something that we should probably address, and I'll discuss that with Manager Beckman.
Okay, great. Thank you. I know that was slightly off track, and my apologies for it. Just trying to figure out in here where the support is. Now, work with me on this. I feel like, you know, when you want to change your habits i.e. let's lose weight, that sometimes having a partner is helpful, or working out or whatever it is. And I just don't know, if there is a buddy system, or when you feel like you're falling off the horse, if there's somewhere to go. Now, I know that we talked about there being a person to kind of troll and all that, but is it the command staff or just your immediate supervisor? When you are angry, frustrated, whatever, who do the officers go to? Because I can't imagine that they all are running to the therapist. I feel like they go when they have to go, right? So I'm just looking for some information there, Lieutenant Turner.
Yeah, they do use the employee assistance programs we have, and it's well used. But yeah, like any police department or sort of anything in America in general, it's probably not as used as much as it should be. We have a peer support team and group, but again, it's mainly focused on a lot of the things that you think about, like with seeing calls for service that are really bad, or seeing a bad accident or something like that. And then your immediate supervisor, or anyone in command, right? I have good rapport with a lot of the people in staff. On the other hand, I have a duty to manage and supervise them, and that means that if I find out they're doing something wrong, that I have to report it or initiate a case against them or something like that, which is does add sort of a barrier between us of having that kind of relationship. So it's difficult. Building those those roots is hard. I do think there is a good culture, and I think at least among the command staff, I definitely know there is a good culture led by Chief Armstrong of bringing these sorts of things to each other. At the same time, I think what really is growing that at the grassroots is starting in the academy and really saying how important it is to hold each other accountable, while at the same time, holding each other and pushing each other up. These sorts of behaviors sort of start with poor decisions that snowball. And so really, like any kind of relationship, if you can stop that sort of thing from the beginning. And I know that's part of a lot of the training and the things that the chief and other executives in command have tried to bring, this idea of seeing something of even in the use of force policy that we went through, right, was addressing something on the front end so it doesn't become a larger problem on the back end.
Okay, thank you. I see no hands. Rania, can you help a reset to tell me where we were in the policy, or Lieutenant Turner? Yeah.
So we were still in content. We kind of moved around a little. I've also made sure, Lieutenant, that some of the edits that were captured in the chat from Director Flynn, from Commissioner Shea, they're included in the document. Chair, I wonder if we can spend the last 10 minutes just trying to organize ourselves for next time. I also want to make sure that, because I hear when we started off, Mr. Percy, I did hear you say that this is a lot to read and get through. One of the suggestions that we started to float, that we start taking this section by section. I know that we also wanted to make sure that we included and heard broader sentiments. I know that this might not have satisfied that discussion, but I wonder if we can think about what section we can take on next, just to make this a little more digestible for us all. I still propose, I shared this with the commissioners, I do propose that we start with rules, that's section D. It's a big one. I'm suggesting that it might take a whole 2 hours, it might take 2 sessions, but it feels to me at least really where the juice is at, and that we can still keep capturing some of these like broader sentiments and conversations. So if it's okay, can we I'd love for this group just to kind of organize at least for next week so that everyone knows where to focus their attention, and let's see if we can make it manageable. Welcome thoughts, edits, builds.
That sounds good to me. Any, I see Darlene's hand.
Do you feel that we've captured, that you have crafted the language that's necessary to not send a mixed message about freedom of speech? That your freedom of speech could get you fired? Do you feel like we've captured that? I don't, yet, because you have your freedom of speech, but it might cost you your job. And I don't want to confuse the officers about that, because a lot of people think freedom of speech means that your employment is protected no matter what you do. And that we know that that's not true. But I don't want this policy to mislead people. I'm now not talking about people being hard-headed. I'm talking about that people can get confused. They can just get straight up confused, and they can think that they're protected, that their freedom of speech protects them from perhaps not being able to be this anymore. I mean, I just don't want to set anybody up with language here that is confusing. And that might take a minute. I don't want to take that on because I don't feel really qualified to write it, but I think we need to clear it up.
Okay,
Director, can I just confirm, is that some of the sentiments that we've captured already in the upfront, and then I think we can repeat it in prohibited? Okay, so
But I still see up front both. I still see,
Yes,
I still
absolutely.
see, yeah, a bunch of language saying, but we're not going to interfere with your freedom of speech. And it's like, yeah, we can't take your freedom of speech away, but you could lose your badge. So,
Absolutely.
so it's just like, I want to make sure that we are educating, I guess, about that particular intersection and not leaving that up to individual interpretation, because they're going to interpret it, you know, to give them maximum freedom to do as they wish. And I just don't want to I don't want to okey doke anybody.
no,
I could
that's-
answer that question. I very informally assigned that to Lieutenant Turner to finish the job on the second section and add a last sentence to get to that sentiment. I think he, because it is a little bit more technical, he will get back to us at our next meeting. And of course, that will, I think, bleed into that next section about rules, which I think is section D of the document.
Yeah, and
That's
I just
why I
want
wanted to make sure that we had covered that, so that when we get into rules, then we can be consistent with it.
absolutely. And Director, I just want to acknowledge that we haven't, while we've been kind of throwing out sentiments in the odd phrase, Lieutenant, I know that you've got a fair rewrite there. And so this group will probably want to come back and review language and make sure that the words that you have ended up choosing in the sentences actually capture the sentiments and the energy that it made. So we will be kind of coming back to sections. It's a little bit of a messy process, but noted in the upfront, please hold it for section D. So if you guys agree, let's read section D, let's read white papers around it, model policies around it. And Director, let's make sure that that sentiment is echoed again in rules and again in considerations, like repetition. I hope that's okay, Lieutenant. Let's see if we can work that. I see Mr. Percy's hand up. You're muted, sir. See if I can unmute you, my end.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Lieutenant Turner, if you could, sir, if you've got the time to send it to me when you're working on this. This is really crucial language. I'm not the final word on anything, but I'd certainly like to take a look at it and give you feedback on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can get my email address from the staff. Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Persley. Appreciate it. Rania, I know we have even less time now to wrap up.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I'll share logistics, Chair, this, and this is for members not of the public, not necessarily joining us, but certainly I'll ask that we repeat this at the commission. This is being recorded. I will post a red line version. Lieutenant Turner, I think I post the red line version that you provided, and then we'll keep doing red lines. So that will be up on the website. And see you in 2 weeks. I mean, I'm okay giving people 5 minutes back. If there's, I perhaps open it up for last thoughts, last sentiments on this.
Really good work, everybody. Oh,
All right.
Anne's got her hand up.
Yeah, I thought 2 weeks ago, I asked about other policies that impacted current policies that impact on officers' expressions. And I really think it would be very helpful for those to be posted on the website for us to be able to reference them. I would also very much like to see the draft on public expression. I think that the Venn diagram of those two policies is a very large shaded area in the middle, and I'd like to see where that's going. And the other thing I just wanted to mention to Chair Jackson, I think that I may have not spoken very artfully in terms of what I had heard about a social media manager. I don't think that that's a recommendation. And we, if we brought in some of these folks who think about it, have been thinking about it for a lot longer, and that might be very helpful. But I don't think it's a recommendation for somebody who spends 40 hours a week trolling the
Okay.
officers' social
Good.
media. I think what it is to have somebody who is paying some level of attention to what the current trends are
Yeah.
in social media and harassment and discrimination as those things overlap, and police departments and what other people are doing, and maybe they discover some interesting training, or they send out a memo, or they tell managers to mention to their officers that suddenly the Three Stooges have been embraced by a white supremacist group. And people with a particular fondness for the Three Stooges need to understand that that could now be perceived as things are just constantly changing. And somebody who's paying some level of attention to that, had that existed this past year, might have caused the Instagram scandal to go a little bit differently, because maybe they would have said, no, this isn't just boys being boys. This is a problem, right? So it's not about trolling the officers. It's
Okay,
more about
got it.
just having somebody who's an expert.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I'm sorry I misunderstood. Thank you. So it looks like everybody's getting 4 minutes back. How about that?
We'll take it.
Enough time for noodles and Lunar New Year. Happy New Year.
Excellent work,
everyone.
everybody. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Take care.
thank you.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye.
night.